How does a person become a psychopath? Is it nature or nurture? Well, Jim Clemente, a former FBI profiler, argues that it's both. As Clemente famously said regarding the development of psychopaths, genetics load the gun, their personality and psychology aim it, and their experiences pull the trigger. But in research, nature is considered more instrumental in developing psychopathic behavior than nurture. Some researchers, such as Hare, even go as far as to say that one can find no convincing evidence that psychopathy is the direct result of early social or environmental factors. However, this has been proven time and time again to be incorrect, as numerous studies describe how one's environment can influence their mental development as a child. Childhood experiences in both sexual and psychological abuse from parental figures has been known to strongly shape a person, but how exactly do the neglectful tendencies of parents affect the development of psychopathic characteristics in children? According to a 2012 study, strong violent behaviors in parental figures negatively affect their children. This article details the effects of negative parenting on children and how children develop certain traits that mimic those of parental figures. It explores the idea of nurture versus nature and identifies certain aspects that lead to negative behaviors in children. As expected, negative parenting and negative child behavior directly correlate, as do positive parenting and positive childhood behavior. In the graph shown, you can see the direct correlation between parental spanking and the correlating home SS score, a measure of a child's happiness and overall response to anger. As you can see, the more spankings, the lower the home SS score. In addition, there was a study that was carried out in 1999 that found a lack of discipline in childhood rearing was related to adult antisocial behavior or psychopathy. Another study conducted in 1995 by Lycan found that inadequate or incompetent parenting leads to insecure attachment bonding that forecasts low levels of empathy, compliance, cooperation, and self-control.
As proven by these aforementioned studies, poor parenting leads to a higher chance of developing psychopathic tendencies. Disturbing and traumatic childhood experiences, such as being exposed to abuse at a young age, can have a significant impact as they develop into adulthood. These circumstances contribute to their personality and life choices, and this introduces the connection between childhood abuse and criminal behavior. Now, it's essential to understand that not all serial killers are victims of childhood abuse, and that abused children don't necessarily have to become serial killers. But in many cases, physical, psychological, and sexual abuse can often shift a person's mindset from an ordinary child to developing psychopathic characteristics. To better understand, let's talk about lust killers, murderers that kill for sexual gratification. These types of killers commit violent crimes due to their exposure to sexually explicit visual material as a child. For example, serial killer Bobby Joe Long was forced to sleep in the same bed with his mother until the age of 13 and was forced to watch her have sex with other men. Okay, and so now I've got this table here that clearly displays the different rates of sexual abuse in the general US population and the serial killer population. Note that we're not just talking about lust killers, but all types of serial killers in general. So if you take a look at the table, we can see that while only 3% of the general population experienced sexual abuse at a young age, 26% of the serial killer population experienced it in their childhood. That's a 23% difference. That's huge. But greater than all of that, the difference in percentage of serial killers who experience psychological abuse to the general population is what's alarming. 48% difference. That means that children who experience psychological abuse had a likelihood of becoming a serial killer 50% of the time. An example of a serial killer who experienced psychological abuse at a young age is Carol Edward Cole. He was forced to wear girls' clothing and serve tea to neighborhood ladies by his mother, even though she knew he didn't like being teased for his feminine name. The psychological abuse and humiliation Carol experienced from his mother at an early age led him to committing violent crimes in his adulthood. But in the case of neglect, it's actually quite interesting. If you look at the table, the percentage of serial killers in the general population that experienced neglect in their childhood was the same. This means that children who experienced such a just neglect in their lives and not necessarily any types of abuse have an equal chance of committing sequences of murders than not.
Okay, so we've talked about external factors, such as parental abuse or just the environment that these kids grew up in. But what about the genetic side? Have you ever met a kid that's never gotten in trouble? Chances are probably not. Testing limits is part of our childhood development and helps form our sense of what's right and what's wrong. There is a limit to how far this behavior can be taken, though. Repeated lying, stealing, and other disruptive behaviors with no feeling of remorse could be signs of a conduct disorder, or CD, which is a prerequisite for diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder. Not all kids diagnosed with CD grow up to be psychopaths, though. Some even grow out of their symptoms altogether, since ASPD can't be diagnosed until one reaches the age of 18. However, approximately 25% of girls and 40% of boys with conduct disorder go on to be diagnosed with ASPD. As previously discussed, parental actions and the environment in which a child grows up in can have varying influences on the development of ASPD in children. To what extent is parental intervening going to impact this disorder, though? Manipulative behavior, callousness, and increased impulsivity are all common indicators of one suffering from ASPD and directly correlate to irregular developments of the brain. Some of these impacted areas are the amygdala, the insula, and the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. The amygdala's main function is to regulate emotions, connect memories with strong feelings, and has a particularly strong impact on aggressive and fearful behavior. It was actually found that after surgically removing the amygdala, previously violent individuals had a dramatic decrease in aggressive behavior. This area of the brain in psychopaths also tends to be much more inflamed than those of a person not suffering from ASPD. See the connection? The insula, another area of the brain impacted, plays a significant role in self-awareness and gut feelings, areas that psychopaths have much trouble with, as their impulsivity and common failure to read others shows. In individuals diagnosed with ASPD, the insula was significantly thinner, proving that a genetic component is involved and linked to that. Lack of empathy is one of the most common characteristics people associate with psychopaths, and is what makes their callous nature something many books and movies base their villains on. The origin of this trait can be attributed to the unusual thinness of the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. This area of the brain is responsible for feelings of empathy, or the lack of. People with damage to or abnormalities in this area often have trouble identifying facial expressions of fear. This inability to observe such an emotion can cause someone to continue an action evoking fear in another, and not being able to read that they should stop can be very dangerous, as you can tell. Because there is a high chance of a genetic component being involved when a child displays possible signs of antisocial personality disorder, sometimes parents trying to help the situation can actually make it worse. For example, general punishment that would work on an average child could have little or no impact on a child possibly on this path to be diagnosed with ASPD, because that child has an inability to experience feelings of remorse. They physically can't. This makes the environment and parents extremely impactful on the extent to which kids develop tendencies of ASPD. When a child is repeatedly displaying these signs, their parents must take the time to properly understand the disorder and know how they can help mitigate any long-term consequences from developing and leading to more violent displays of their symptoms.
So what makes a psychopath? Contrary to the work of previous researchers, it is not solely genetics. Disturbing childhood experiences and neglect from parents has clearly shown to have a correlation with the development of psychopathic characteristics. And so I guess what FBI profiler Jim Clemente said was right. Genetics load the gun, their personality and psychology aim it, and their experiences pull the trigger. Thank you.